Good morning. Or good afternoon if you are on the East Coast. So this is the week number 4. So in the last lecture, we talked about the first 3 basic simple sentence patterns. Today we'll talk more simple sentence patterns, and we'll gradually develop the idea why certain parts of speech deliver the most important information in English sentences, and why verbs are the most important part of speech. Okay, let's have a quick summary of what we have studied so far. So we have studied 3 patterns of simple sentences, and they are: pattern 1, we have a subject, then we have a be verb. Remember, be verb is the most unique verb in English because it has actually 8 different forms, including the basic be itself. But that's not the focus of today. So we will just know for pattern 1, we have subject, then we have a be verb, then we have a subjective complement, and that's an adjective. And the second pattern, the pattern 2, is we still have subject and the be verb, and we still have a subject complement, but this subjective complement is a noun. So you have 2 types of subjective complement. One is adjective, the other is noun, but both of them supplement the idea about the subject. Without them, the sentence is not complete. You cannot give a full idea about what the sentence is about. So those are the just very kind of just a fundamental, very basic sentences that we usually learn how to say English from the very beginning. And pattern 3 is kind of interesting. It carries some property of the first 2, but instead of have a subjective complement, which just adjective and the nouns, we have an adverb in this case, and this adverb is usually either of time or place. However, there are some exceptions. Those are very rare cases that we are not going to discuss here, but keep in mind that this is an adverb. Usually, it will not appear in the subject plus a be verb sentence. So this pattern 3 is fairly rare. And just as a side note, this adverb has a special grammatical term. We call that obligatory adverbial, meaning that for this pattern 3, this adverb is necessary. Without it, it cannot complete the idea. We will see why we have such an interesting term for that obligatory adverbial later when we study a different type of simple sentence pattern. But so far, those 3 patterns are what we have studied so far. You have to know that be verb is the most just kind of special verb. That's why we study those 3 patterns at the beginning. So at the bare minimum, we have seen 4 parts of speech to build those sentences, build those 3 different patterns of sentences. First, we would need a noun because a subject is a noun or non-equivalent. It cannot be anything else. Of course, a non-equivalent includes a pronoun. So when you see a pronoun, it's essentially a nickname for a noun, or it points to a noun. So in that sense, we consider a pronoun just as a noun. So a subject logically must be a noun or a noun equivalent. Could be a gerund, could be an infinitive, could be a noun clause, but all those logically still like a noun. And of course, we have a verb, which is for now just the be verb. As we'll see today, we'll see different other verbs in just basic simple sentence patterns. But for now, we have only seen the be verb. And then we have adjective, which is subjective complement in pattern 1. And then we see adverb, which is the special verb, adverb of time or place in pattern 3. So, at the bare minimum, we need those 4 types, just simple sentences, to we need those 4 parts of speech to build simple sentences that we have learned. This really tells us why those 4 parts of speech is so important. Because even at the bare minimum, we are looking at the most basic English sentences, and we need that. So recall that we say there are 8 parts of speech in English, but 4 of them deliver substantive information, and the other 4 parts of speech, they are kind of just glue words or just function words that do not really provide substantive information. So we clearly see that to build those 3 very basic, very simple sentences, we need those 4 parts of speech. They really carry substantive information in English sentences. For the other 4, for example, pronoun, we just discussed. Pronoun essentially, it points to a noun, so it's just a nickname for a noun. By itself, it doesn't provide substantive information. And the conjunction, prepositions, they're kind of just glue words. They connect things together. And finally, we have interjection, which is all by itself. It's a different animal, so we don't just consider it's kind of just a secondary. All right, so let's pause for a second to think about those 4 parts of speech. Why they are so important in English? At this point, because you are already in middle school, even high school, you have certainly learned different classes in English. You have studied sentences that are compound or complex. You have already studied those more kind of advanced sentences than simple sentence. Then you know we have clauses, dependent clauses. But how do we classify those clauses? Well, one way to classify those clauses is based on their logical function. What are those clauses equivalent to certain parts of speech? We have essentially 3 categories of clauses, and they map actually to 3 of the 4 parts of speech here. They are noun, adjective, and adverb, because each clause logically should be equivalent to one of those 3 parts of speech. So we have noun clauses, adjective clauses and adverb clauses, which makes sense because the other most important actually are part of speech verbs. They do not have any corresponding equivalent clauses. On the other hand, verbs are so important, so we need some way to just have some variation when we just describe actions or behaviors. So instead of having verb clause, of course there's no such a thing. Instead of having verb clauses, we have so-called verbals. And the verbs, they have 3 different types of verbals. Again, you don't have to worry about those terms for now because we have not formally studied them. This is just kind of a preview of what will be coming in this course. So the 3 types of verbals are gerund. Gerund functions as a noun. Okay? Participles. We have 2 types of participles. Present participle, which is the ing form of an action verb, or could be be verb, being as well. And we have the past participles, which is the ed form of a verb. Both are participles, but logically, a participle functions as an adjective. We will learn all those later. This is again just a preview, so you don't have to be just kind of overwhelmed. And the last part of last verbal here is the most versatile one, which is the infinitive. Infinitive, unlike a gerund or participle, which very specifically correspond to nouns and adjectives, infinitives can be noun, adjective, or adverb. So all the other 3 most important parts of speech can all be represented by infinitives. So that's where verbs are so complicated and kind of just confusing if you just not just very familiar with grammar. And they're super important because when we write, we want to use all those tools just at such a level we can use them, make sure that you get grammatically correct sentences, but more importantly, you want to build your sentences in very productive, very efficient way. So all those tools are at your disposal, but you really need to learn how they work. Okay, so this is we just use the 3 very basic simple sentence patterns to illustrate why those things are important. Okay, so today we will continue to study more simple sentence patterns. And they are all very basic because we are only looking at the bare minimum forms of those patterns. We are not adding a lot of modifiers, and that will come up in the next couple of lectures. So the 4th pattern, this is perhaps the simplest sentences you will see in English, except imperative, which does not even have a subject. Imperative is just like a stop, go. Those sentences are so simple, you only see one word, which is the verb. Where's the subject? The subject is implicitly you. You stop, you go. And we call that an understood subject because you did not even say what the subject is. So those are the technically the simplest sentence because you only have one word, and that is the verb. But those sentences are rarely just formal sentences, right? Only probably in novels. You will not see them in just formal English writing. So we do not consider them just as real, just standard written English. So other than imperative sentences, so this kind of pattern for simple sentences, at the bare minimum, you only have two words, which is subject and a so-called intransitive verb. Well, here is one. The lady smiled. Of course, lady, we have an article here, which is a modifier, but essentially, this sentence only has two words. Lady smiled. So, we can, if we want, we can have some exemplary sentences truly only have two words, like birds sing, right? So, how do we diagram this sentence? It's so simple, must be easy to diagram it. And that is actually correct. Remember, when we say what a sentence is about, we use this kind of diagram to illustrate what sentence is about. We have subject, we have verb. And this is exactly the case. So we have subject on the left-hand side of the vertical divider bar, and a intransitive verb appearing to the right to this bar. And this sentence would be diagrammed just like that. The lady smiled. Okay. So unlike the first or second pattern, we don't have a third slot above the main line because we don't even have any complement for the subject. So only two things, subject and verb. It's that simple. Okay. Of course, the modifier here is just a kind of just a secondary element. So essentially, if we have a simple sentence like birds sing, then only here the subject and the verb. Okay, so this sentence is so simple, but it actually represents a fairly large number of sentences in English because we can add all kinds of modifiers to either the subject or the verb. Okay. Now, the next one, pattern number 5. This is the most important simple sentence patterns. It just represents such a huge number of English sentences. So this is also called the so-called SVO pattern, subject, verb, and object. So SVO pattern, it's so just kind of prominent in English that it's almost always started as the first type of sentence pattern when we talk about how to classify simple sentences into different patterns. But here, we list here as a number 5 in our classification because that's how logically we progress. Okay, so let's take a look at this typical so-called SVO pattern. The lady told a sad story. Okay, we highlight the 3 words here in different colors to show that those 3 words constitute the backbone of this sentence. How do we diagram this sentence? Well, not surprisingly, we have 3 slots above the main line. We have the first the normal vertical bar which goes across the main line to separate the subject and the verb. To the right of the verb, notice that this is a so-called transitive verb. A transitive verb must have an object, and usually we call that direct object, because as we will learn later, we also have a second object called indirect object. So here, where we diagram this, we have three slots: the subject, the verb, and the verb's direct object, which simply usually say it's object when we only have one object for the verb. So the sentence would like this: the lady told a sad story. Of course, a and sad here are modifiers to this noun story, which is the object. It's very important to understand this is the most important simple sentence pattern. We know simple sentences are the building blocks for more complicated sentences, compound or complex or compound complex sentences. But simple tenses is the thing that you really want to spend time to study. And this pattern number 5 represents the most kind of most common sentences you will see, simple sentences you will see in English. It's so important. Usually we just call it SVO, subject, verb, object. And transitive verbs correspondingly are the most important part of speech you want to study. Okay, so notice that in the diagram here, the straight line between the verb and the direct object indicates that the subject and object have no direct relation. Okay, subject and object. Just by that kind of spelling, you can see that somehow this is probably from Latin. I'm not sure, but it represents some kind of a noun. Both represent some noun, but they have no direct relationship. Okay, they are somehow connected via a verb in between. This verb is as a transitive verb. You can think about logically, what is the relationship between the subject and the transitive verb? The subject is the performer or the agent of this action represented by this verb. And what is the relationship between the verb and object? The object is the thing or people that are affected by this verb. Or you can also say it's the recipient of the action. Okay? So, because the two bars separate the subject and object, they do not have any direct relationship. They are connected via this transitive verb. On the other hand, if you recall what happened in pattern 1 and pattern 2, we have subjective complement. And there, we did not use a vertical bar to separate the second and third slot. Instead, we use a backward slant or diagonal line segment to point back to the subject from the complement. So this diagonal line really, just as an arrow, shows that the complement is directly related to the subject. It completes the idea. That's why it's called complement. But the logical relationship is that it has a direct relationship with the subject. Okay, for example, Alice is beautiful. Alice here is a noun. It's a name. It's a noun. We will learn later that it's called a proper noun, but it's a noun. So earlier we used a sentence called that she's beautiful, but that's just a pronoun, right? So we know pronoun is just a pointer to a noun. She must represent someone, and someone this is a noun. Okay, Alice is beautiful. Alice is a beautiful girl. Both beautiful and girls here on the just in those two diagrams are related back to Alice through the diagonal line. So it's very important to understand why one is an object in the pattern 5, one is a complement in pattern 1 and pattern 2. And the verbs are also different. Here, in pattern 5, we have transitive verb, and in pattern 1 and 2, we have a be verb. As we will see later today, in pattern 6 and 7, we can replace this be verb with a so-called linking verb. But logically, that's very similar to the be verb. Okay, so now let's have another quick summary. We have just added 2 more patterns for simple sentence, right? Pattern 4, subject and intransitive verb. And subject is logically just a noun or noun equivalent. And pattern number 5, we have subject, transitive verb, and object. And object, just like subject, is usually just a noun or noun equivalent. Okay? Very rarely you can see some logically that is a noun. Very rarely. It can happen. Okay? But almost 99.99% of the cases, the object of the transitive verb is just a noun. Okay, so far we have seen pattern 1 through 5. They make up most of simple sentences in English. Okay, so there are more simple sentence patterns, but they are all some expansion of those 5, especially number 5. Okay, so we will see how to expand pattern number 5 into more simple sentences. But what's coming up now, pattern number 6 and 7 are kind of expansion of pattern 1 and 2. We'll see that shortly. But those 5 patterns, really, the be verb and the transitive verb, intransitive verb, sentences that dominated, simple sentences that dominated by those verbs and by those patterns. Okay. Pattern 4 and pattern 5 are particularly important because they are dominated by action verbs. Both intransitive verb and transitive verbs are called so-called action verbs. They are really the soul of English sentences. You really have to master a very strong vocabulary of action verbs in order to write good English. Okay. Now, we are looking into the next pattern, pattern number 6. So now, if you take a look at the structure, it's very similar to pattern number 1, where we have subject plus a be verb plus subjective complement, right? So here we simply replace be verb with a linking verb. And what is that? Well, let's take a look at this sentence. The lady seems unhappy. we could say the lady is unhappy. You know the meaning of both sentences. Now you can see that this sentence, the lady seems unhappy, the meaning is very close to the lady is unhappy, except that there's small uncertainty there, right? If we say the lady is unhappy, there's no uncertainty at all. We just say the lady is unhappy. But if we say the lady seems unhappy, we still try to say the lady is unhappy, but it just adds a little bit uncertainty. We are not sure. We are not 100% sure. Maybe we are wrong, but we believe the lady is unhappy. So the lady seems unhappy. Since the meaning is so close, logically, the structure must represent pattern 1 a lot. That's actually the case. You think about it. What is unhappy here? Unhappy is an adjective. But what is this adjective about? It describes the state, the mental state of the lady. So it's somehow modifying the subject, the lady here. But the modification is through the verb, which is seems here. So seems is really just connecting this subject, which is a noun, with this adjective, unhappy. So logically, just like the lady is unhappy, unhappy completes the idea about the subject. If we just simply say the lady seems, that's exactly like the case the lady is. The sentence is not complete. It does not tell what the idea is all about. But once you add this adjective unhappy, now we know the idea is telling the lady's mental state. So the lady seems unhappy. That's why this seem is a so-called linking verb. It's very important to understand why it's called linking verb. It linked the next word to the previous word. And the previous word, of course, is subject. And in this case, the next word is an adjective. That's we also call this subjective complement predicate adjective, just like in pattern 1. So you can see that linking verb here, seem, its function is very close to be verb is. As a matter of fact, a lot of grammar books simply say a be verb or the be verb is just a special linking verb. Okay, the two sometimes are just referred both by this term, linking verb. Be is just a special linking verb. Okay? Okay, so how do you diagram this sentence? Well, not surprisingly, it will be diagrammed exactly the same way as in pattern 1. Okay, so because this is very similar to pattern 1, so it's diagramming. The general structure is like this: the subject, the linking verb, and the subject complement. This actually applies to pattern 7 as well, as we will see. Excuse me. So here's how it looks like. The lady seems unhappy. Once again, we have 3 slots above the main line, and the first 2, of course, subject and the verb, and the third one is the subjective complement. Just like in pattern 1, we have a backward slant diagonal line, and indicate that this subjective complement, unhappy, really relates back to our subject. It describes the subject's mental status. Okay, so if you recognize this, pattern 6 is nothing but kind of a variation of pattern 1. Now, pattern 7. Similarly, pattern 7 is just closely just related to pattern 2. We just remember pattern 2 is closely related to pattern 1 in the sense that there we replace the subjective complement with a noun, replace the adjective with a noun, and that is called the predicate noun. Here, pattern number 7 is similar to pattern number 2 because we replace the be verb with a linking verb. Okay? The lady became a legend. Well, what does became here do? Is became an action verb? In this sentence, no. What this sentence, its meaning is just like the lady changed from some kind of character into a legend. But we can almost say the lady is a legend, except that only recently this change happened. Before, maybe the lady was not a legend, but the lady became a legend. But the logical meaning is still very close to the lady is a legend if we just ignore the time constraint. So just like the lady is a legend, the legend noun completes the idea. It characterizes the lady. It gives the lady a second name. Who is the lady? She's a legend. She became a legend. So here, became really is once again a linking verb connecting the next word here, legend, to the subject lady. So this is a variation of pattern 2. So the diagram is also almost the same as pattern 2, where we have subject, the linking verb, the predicate noun, and the lady became a legend. So if you know how to diagram pattern number 2, you should immediately know how to diagram pattern number 7 as well. But the real question is that how can I really tell which verb is an action verb or in this case a linking verb? That's actually a big question and a very important one. Luckily, we don't have that many linking verbs in English in the first place. But it's really a fundamental question. When a linking verb appears, you really want to examine the relationship between the next word and the previous word. Is there an action involved? Or this is just kind of relates back to the subject itself? Remember, in pattern number 5, when we have a transitive verb, the object is not logically directly related to the subject. It must go through that transitive verb. The object is impacted or affected by the action. It's the recipient of the action. On the other hand, the subject is the agent or the performer of the action. So the two are only connected through that transitive verb. But when we have linking verb, the subjective complement has a direct relationship with the subject. Even without the linking verb, we can see that a legend is just a lady. They talk about the same person. Earlier, number 6, the lady is unhappy. Unhappy here is the inherent just kind of status, mental status of the lady. In that sense, it's directly connected. That's the same thing for number 7. Legend, we are talking about the same lady here. So that's just a most important just a distinction between number 5 or number 6 or number 7. So one is the object and the subject are decoupled. We saw that the action verb in between, they have no relationship. But in pattern 1, 2, 6, and 7, the subject and the subject complement, they are all linked by the verb in between. Okay? And in the broad sense, be verb is a linking verb, so we may just use linking verb to describe both. Okay? So that's pattern number 7. It's important to understand that pattern 6 is just a variation of pattern 1, and pattern 7 is just a variation of pattern 2. And the relationship between 6 and 7 is exactly the same as the relationship between 1 and 2. We replace the adjective with a noun for the subjective complement. If you feel overwhelmed already by all those terms, those things are fairly simple, right? Why we use so complicated terms to describe them? Because grammar is about the rules. When we talk about the rules, we need structures. And here we are. We are trying to understand the rules by carefully putting them into structures. That's why we need all those kinds of, jargons. Okay, now talk about the most important thing in English, that is verb. We have emphasized many times that verbs are the most important thing when you study English for your writing, because verbs are the soul of English sentences. Well, verbs can be really complicated, especially when you consider all those verbals, the gerund, the participle, the infinitives. But at a high level, we can actually classify verbs into just a few, at a high level, quite simple categories. At top level, we can consider action verbs, which we just briefly mentioned. Those intransitive verbs, transitive verbs. And we have another category, essentially just 2 action verbs or non-action verbs. But non-action verbs, we call them state of being verbs. Essentially, they are just linking verbs. Okay, as we'll see. So action verbs, this is the most important thing you want to know. Okay, we already said it. Transitive verbs followed by object indicating who or what are affected by this action. Okay? Beckenham, the British soccer star, Beckenham kicked the ball. So kick here is clearly a transitive verb because it has a direct object, ball. And the ball is affected by this action, kick. Or ball is the recipient of this action, kicked. And who performed this kicking action? Beckenham. Okay? She ate her dinner. Ate what? Ate dinner. Dinner is the recipient of this action. And she, here is a pronoun pointing to a person, and in that sense, it's a noun. this person performed the eating action, ate dinner. Okay? It's very apparent. Then we have intransitive verb. Well, intransitive verb do not have an object. All by itself, it completes the idea. It does not need an object. Very importantly in English, a huge number of verbs can behave both as transitive verb and intransitive verb at the same time. And in most cases, those two meanings connote the same concept about action. But there are some verbs where, while they also have both the transitive verb and intransitive versions, the two can just denote kind of just somehow different meaning. For example, if I say I stop, or I stop the car, stop here can be both intransitive, I stop, or transitive, I stopped the car. But think about it. Do the two stops really mean the same action? Not really. When I say I stop, it's really about myself. My activities have been stopped. When I say I stop the car, this is the action upon the car. The car is a recipient. Also, still, I perform the stopping action, but its meaning is to stop the car, not to stop myself. So in that sense, the two stops do not mean exactly the same action. But a lot of verbs, the two actions are actually the same. So using the two examples above, we can just say Beckham kicked. Well, this kick is an intransitive verb because it does not need an object. It merely say Beckham performed this kicking action. But this kicking action essentially is the same action when we say Beckham kicked the ball. It's the same action. Similarly, we can say she ate. She already ate. This ate is the same action as she ate the dinner. Although in this case, we don't need a direct object. We merely describe what action she performed. We don't need to tell there's a recipient of this action. We merely describe the action itself. That's what intransitive verb is all about. It does not need a direct just object as being impacted by this action or receiving this action. It's just all about the subject itself. We describe what action the subject performs. Okay, so those are the so-called action verbs. As we will learn later, and for those of you who have already learned this, in English there's also a distinction between active voice or passive voice. And when we talk about passive voice, it's important to understand if you have an intransitive verb and you don't have object, you cannot convert the active sentence into a passive sentence. It's only possible if you have a transitive verb and this transitive verb has a direct object. Only in such a case we can convert an active sentence into a passive sentence. Now in that case, the object in the active sentence will become the subject of the passive sentence. For example, Beckham kicked the ball. The ball was kicked by Beckham. That's the passive voice. There's a very small group of words, verbs actually, transitive verbs. They look like or they behave like transitive verbs. However, the objects cannot be converted into the subject in the passive sentence. So, like this, this clothes fits me. I cannot say I was fit by this clothes. That is ungrammatical. So there are a small, very small group of transitive verbs or so-called middle verbs. They behave like transitive verb, but you cannot do an active passive conversion. But this is for future. I just want to quickly make a comment here. There are certain exceptions. Remember, English grammar is not a computer science language grammar, where in computer languages, C++ or Java or Python, we establish the grammar before we allow any sentence to happen or any code to happen. All the code you write must conform to the grammar of that language. Otherwise, your code cannot run. Either the compiler or the interpreter will refuse to run the code or even to compile the code because the code violates the grammar. But in English, grammar was not preset. It developed over time, and there's no central authority like God of grammar who says what should do, what should not be done. So in this case, there are always exceptions to rules. It's just that when we study the basic grammar, most cases follow the rules, but there are always some exceptions. Okay. So we are talking about action verbs. Now, state of being verbs. We use this term state of being just in contrast to action. When we use those verbs, there are no action per se happen. Actually, state of being verbs, it's just a fancy way of saying linking verbs. And linking verbs, if we exclude be verb, then we separate be verb from linking verbs. So essentially, state of being verbs are be verbs. Actually, you only have one be verb, but because it has different forms, am, is, are, was, were, being, been, we generally call them be verbs. Okay, it's just different forms of one single unique, super unique verb in English that is be. Okay, am, is, are all just different forms of it. So was, were, being, using progressive tense, and being usually using just a perfect tense. We will study tense later. Okay, so be verb and linking verb. Be verb, they were happy. He has been there. Or also just be verbs. And linking verbs, well, I already mentioned, linking verbs can be replaced by the be verb, a form of be verb, without substantially changing the meaning of the sentence. But the very reason it's called linking verb, not be verb, is because they're still not 100% be verb. There are some kind of small differences, like we say, seems tells a little bit uncertainty there. It's not 100% sure, otherwise it would be verb. Became give you a time constraint. Just recently this happened, or just at some point in the past, and only after that point, she is a legend. Okay? She has not always been legend. At some point earlier, she was not a legend. Okay? But essentially, the sentences with linking verb structure pattern 6 and 7, you can say roughly you can replace the linking verb with be verb. Okay, of course, subject to those minor constraints. Okay, what exactly is linking verb? That's what we'll start next. So linking verb can be kind of the task is if you can replace them with a be verb, the sentence still carry very close or similar meanings, just subject to a certain minor constraint or modifications, then you know you have a linking verb. But more importantly, to tell a linking verb is not a action verb, is to examine the words after linking verb. They can be adjective or noun. But remember, action verb, when you have object, it could also be a noun. So you do not just check the just parts of speech of the words, but you really examine the logical relationship. That's important. The logical relationship between the subject and the word after this verb. Okay, like that we just discussed, right? Direct relationship or no direct relationship. That's where we can tell the difference between what is not a linking verb and what is linking verb. Very luckily, we don't have that many linking verbs in English, but and there are certain patterns. So all of the verbs of sense can be used as linking verbs. What are the verbs of sense? Well, we have eyes, we can see. We have ears, we can listen, we can hear. But listen is action verb. Song is a linking verb. Okay, we have our tongues, we can taste. We have our hand or skin, we can touch and feel. So all those, just each sense has each verb of sense has just a linking verb function. So the soup tastes good because we can use our tongue to taste the soup, but the soup tastes good. Good here is about the soup, directly just related to soup. So the taste here is a linking verb. The soup smelled good. We can use our nose to smell the aroma of the soup. So smell here is again just like taste. Here is a linking verb. The soup smelled good. The soup looked good. We can use our eyes to see, well, maybe the content in the soup, what's the ingredient of the soup. So it looked good. Well, the soup sounded good when you suggest it. This is also a linking verb. Also, in this sentence, it's a complex sentence. We have a clause where you suggested giving the context why the soup sounded good. Or we can simply just, if you already provide this contact information earlier in the same paragraph, we can just say, the soup sounded good. Yeah, you suggest we go to a restaurant to have a particular soup from the menu. Yeah, you suggested the soup sounded good. So sound here is also a linking verb. Because in all those cases, the good, the actual good, is characterizing the soup. Okay? So the verb in between is not an action verb. We certainly don't know what is taste. Well, taste could be an action verb, but that has completely different meaning. So in all those cases, and the soup felt good on such a cold day. Yeah, I just had a bowl of this soup. It really felt good. Okay, but this is not about I feel good. This is about soup felt good. The good adjective is describing the soup. Okay, so felt here is again a linking verb. So we have other linking verbs as well. I became sleepy around midnight. Sleepy here describes my current physical status. So it really describes me as the subject. Therefore, this become is a linking verb. People seem intelligent when they think before they speak. Probably we should all learn how to do that. And that's a kind of lifelong learning process. We will become better people if we always think before we speak. Of course, that's too much a burden on just for daily conversation. But if you want to speak something important, you better think before you speak. So people seem intelligent when they think before they speak. Moments of happiness appear frequently in the life of a secure child. Okay. Appear in the life of secure child. Here, appear as a linking verb. In the life of a secure child is what we call a prepositional phrase, functioning here as a adjective. Okay, senior citizens remain valuable community members. Senior citizens remain valuable community members. Senior citizens, they're members. So senior citizens remain. This is just linking verb, and it shows that the members is just another name for citizens. They are talking about the same people. They refer to the same people. So remain here is a linking verb, and the list goes on and on. We have different types of linking verb, but the key is to tell whether it's really linked the subject to a complement. Okay, so leaves turn red, orange, and yellow in the fall. Turn, we can just say the leaves are red or orange or yellow, but of course there's a time constraint here. Before this turning point, the leaves are not in those colors, but after that, the leaves are in those different colors. So this term is really a linking verb. It's not action. So all the linking verbs, of course, are not action verbs, but you need to look at the words carefully to tell that's true. Okay, the nights grow shorter before the summer solstice. Okay, so all those are examples of linking verbs, but still you may feel a little bit confused. I still cannot tell why certain verbs are linking verbs, because I think taste can also be an action verb. I tasted soup, right? You're absolutely right, because many linking verbs can also function as action verbs. Okay? Really depend on what kind of sentence you have. So, the farmer grew sad as she talked about his childhood. Here, this is a linking verb because you can replace the verb with a be verb. We can say the farmer was sad as he talked about his childhood. Okay, the task here if you can replace that verb with a be verb, the sentence is pretty much the same meaning except some minor difference. Then you know you have a linking verb. On the other hand, if you cannot do this, if the sentence broke, then you don't have a linking verb. Okay, so in the next example, the farmer grew corn. What is that? Did that mean? Here, grew or grow is truly a transitive verb, an action verb. What is action? This grow means that you plant the corn, just cultivate it, and you harvest in fall. So this action is for you plant the corn. Okay, the corn, which is a noun, is not another name for the farmer. Corn and farmer are two differences. They are not related. One is subject, one is the object. The two are completely different things if we don't have this verb, which is a transitive verb, an action verb, connect now. Once it's connected, the farmer became the agent or the performer of the action, while corn becomes the recipient of this action or being impacted by this action. Okay? Apparently, if you replace a grew with was, that would be a ridiculous thing. The farmer was a corn. That would be just ridiculous. So here we have an action verb instead of a linking verb. So in summary, be verb and linking verb, we are talking about linking verb in the narrow sense. In broader sense, it includes the be verb. They cannot complete the thought of the sentence. Okay? So usually we must follow a be verb or linking verb. So that's in our pattern 1, 2, 6, 7 with an adjective that modifies subject. That's called predicate adjective. Or with a noun, or sometimes could be pronoun, because pronoun is an equivalent of noun, that renames subject. We just give the subject a second name, another name. Okay? So that's how we use this linking verb. The connection is different from a transitive verb. So Carla is happy. Carla is a lifeguard. Clearly, in both cases, happy characterize Carla, and lifeguard just another way for naming Carla. Once we know this, Carla is a lifeguard. So we cannot really just tell be verb. Exceptionally, when we have a be subject and be verb, we may add an adverb, and that adverb is in pattern number 3. Okay, so in this case, it's not linking to the we are not connecting the subject to the adverb, because that doesn't make sense. In that case, the adverb is actually kind of just tell something about the subject, but not inherently part of the just inherent character of the subject. Okay, so that's in pattern 3. The party was yesterday. But yesterday, as an adverb, is neither a name for the party nor an inherent character or property of a party. So that is really is an exception rather than the rule. Okay. That's all we have for today. That example is color is here. Here is adverb. Here is not another name for color. Here is not a property or way to characterize color. Okay. So in this case, this adverb is called obligatory adverb. meaning that this adverb is actually necessary. We definitely need it for this particular sentence to be complete. But it's a special case. It's more like an exception rather than a rule when we have this kind of obligatory adverb. We'll see more obligatory adverb later in different sentence pattern. But here, to understand pattern number 3, it's actually quite unusual. And we need an obligatory adverb to complete the sentence. That's all we have today. I think we have a lot of just covered. So it's important to walk through those concepts very slowly and really get a deep understanding why we are just doing all those kinds of classification. It will really help you understand grammar and help you to write better. Okay? I will see you next time. I'm due to give you some more exercises now. See you next time.